Hi, I'm Charles with AniCap. This is my recap for the anime Berserk of Gluttony. If you like my recaps, please consider subscribing. The story begins as a masked man fights several monsters. He demonstrates exceptional strength but is unsatisfied and wants more. We then watch as a man on a carriage is attacked by the same goblins and cries for help. Luckily for him, a couple of warriors arrive and the man is glad to be saved. The warriors easily defeat several of them, but there are hundreds more. This isn't a problem though, as they have more members in their group and proclaim that they will defeat all the monsters. Afterwards, we meet our protagonist named Fate, whose stomach growls from hunger. The band of warriors make their triumphant return and Fate hears them talking about their success. Fate states that he could never go goblin hunting like them since he is completely useless, and he has a stomach that never stops growling. Fate explains that he blames all his misfortune on his useless skill called Gluttony. He reminds himself to be grateful though, as at least he has a job. Sometime later, everyone marvels as the Holy Knights make their way through the town. They are a trio of Berserk siblings. A man then fears for his life as he accidentally drops some food that touches one of them, and the one named Hato questions what the peasant is doing. The peasant begins to answer, but Hato becomes furious that the man is speaking to him. The peasant begins to apologize, but this makes them even more mad. They warn that anyone that insults the Holy Knights will have their heads cut off. They decide to leave but tell the man that he is lucky to still be alive. Everyone is upset to watch this happen, but no one is brave enough to do anything about it. At the castle, Fate is glad that the day is almost over and exclaims that it's almost time to go home. The knights make their way to the castle where they ask Fate if he thinks he has done a good job filling in for them. Fate thinks he has, so Raphael gives him his pay. As if throwing it on the ground wasn't bad enough, they make him pick it up in front of them too. Hato very clearly steps on Fate's hand on purpose, but mockingly apologizes as he states that Fate was so filthy that he didn't notice him. Fate's stomach begins to growl at the most awkward moment, and Raphael points out how disgusting Fate is. The knights are furious since the growling makes it seem like they don't pay him enough, and they beat him relentlessly. Fate thinks about how in this world, there are haves and there are have-nots. What separates them are the special powers bestowed by the gods, their skills. The knights keep treating him like a punching bag and explain that he owes his livelihood to them. Someone with a worthless skill like his is only earning money thanks to the grace of holy knights like them. They tell him that he should be grateful, and when he slacks off, it reflects poorly on them. They demand that he get on his feet, but only to knock him back down. They believe he needs to be taught a lesson and explain that defiant dogs need strict discipline. Just then, they are told to stop, since inflicting that kind of abuse on citizens they have sworn to protect is not an act of a holy knight. The girl talking is named Roxy, and she explains that watching the gate is an honorable duty for a holy knight. A duty that should be their responsibility. The knights consider it a difference of opinion, but decide that it's best to leave. Roxy helps the beaten down loser, but he notices Raphael giving him the dirtiest look. Roxy cleans him up and tells him that helping him is no problem since they are the same when it comes to watching gates. Furthermore, this is how a holy knight like herself should conduct themselves. She takes over guarding the gate and tells Fate to tell her if anything like this happens again. Instead of accepting the gesture like a normal person, Fate just tells her that he is used to it and leaves. Afterward, we see why he said that as he thinks about how Raphael is and there's no telling what he might do. It turns out that Fate isn't a complete loser as he is just trying to protect Roxy and doesn't want to risk getting her involved. The bartender explains to Fate that if he keeps letting the knights treat him that way, he's going to end up like the last guy. There's only one outcome for that, and it's a nasty one. On his way home, Fate curses how his stomach is still growling even though he just ate an entire meal. He condemns his gluttony skill and wishes he could have been born with something worthwhile. He is not asking to be a holy knight, and he would take being a warrior or even a merchant or a craftsman. However, there's no changing how things are. He states that when you have nothing, you're just trapped as a loser. Just then, Fate notices some thieves attacking someone, and the wimp's first thought is to get Roxy. He tells her what's going on, and she leaves the useless loser to take over her spot as a guard. He seems to just be okay with this and just stands by while he hears her beat up the thieves. Just then, one of the thieves begins to run towards Fate, and his cowardly instincts immediately tell him to run away. However, Fate stops himself and thinks about how Roxy trusted him with guarding the gate, and if he runs, it'll cause trouble for her. Fate then fights against every cowardly bone in his body to prepare to battle. He notices that the thief is already injured and only now becomes confident that he can stop him. Fate lets out a scream, giving his best impression of a brave warrior, and makes a hole right in the thief's chest. Just then, a voice states that his gluttony skill has been activated, and his stats will now increase. Fate can't understand what's happening, and the voice states that the skills Identify and Telepathy have been added. Fate has never been more confused in his life, just as Roxy returns from the fight. Of course, she is concerned for his life since he is so weak, but Fate notices something strange. He heard words coming from her, but her lips didn't move, and it was almost like he could hear her inner voice. He explains that he is okay, and it happens again. She states that she has to report everything, but Fate is shocked to see that he can't hear it anymore. He tells her that she can take credit for his kill, since he is sure it would cause problems for him if Raphael found out. Roxy wanted to give him credit, but as a show of gratitude, she settles on offering him a job working for her family. He initially tries to decline, but she doesn't listen, and asks him if he intends to serve the Valerics until it kills him. Fate begins to consider it, and thinks about the two paths. On one side is a future where he is treated like trash all the time, and on the other side, he can work for Roxy. Fate is concerned that if he leaves, then the person that replaces him will just get treated like trash instead. However, Roxy tells him to stop thinking so much, and just ignore that very good point he made. Fate listens to her advice and agrees to work for her family. That night, Fate sits on his sorry excuse for a bed in his bedroom that looks like a prison, and shockingly realizes that all his stats are now in the triple digits. His new skills are also a mystery, but he realizes that he must have been using telepathy. He has no clue what is happening to his body, but grows confident as he might now be able to beat monsters with his new stats. The next day, Fate searches for a sword, but the merchant is disappointed to see that he is poor. The merchant shoos him away, as Fate thinks about how it's been 5 years since he came to the royal capital, and 2 silver coins are everything he has been able to save up by working. All hope isn't lost, however, as the merchant tells him that he can still afford the trash weapons he keeps in a barrel. The merchant turns his back, giving Fate the perfect opportunity to take whatever he wants, but Fate decides to just look in the barrel instead. While doing so, he uses his new Identify skill to read the stats of all the barrel weapons. They all have 0 for both durability and strength, but one sword captures his eye. It's filthy and has been treated like trash, so Fate can't help but notice how he has those qualities as well. Just then, Fate is shocked as he hears the words "Hey you" come from the sword. The sword, named Greed, states that it will make it worth his while and tells Fate to just hurry up and buy him. Greed knows about Fate's gluttony, and it says it's because they have a lot in common. Fate leaves his only 2 coins and happily takes his new talking sword. Elsewhere, the Valerics talk about how Roxy is apparently trying to hire Fate for the Hart household without even asking them. The girl named Memo wants to teach her what happens when someone defies the Valeric family, but Raphael points out that nobodies like Fate can easily be replaced. Besides that, the Harts and the Valerics are part of the 5 great families that support the kingdom, and there's no point in complicating that now. Raphael heads to the military district, prompting Memo to ask what he plans to study this time. He shocks her though, as he plans to study how to become immortal. Sometime later, Fate walks with his talking sword, and it warns him that something is approaching. A goblin appears from nowhere, but Fate is now able to destroy it. Doing so activates his gluttony skill again, and his stats are increased even more. This time, the skill's strength boost has been added. Greed then has a good laugh, as Fate is in great trouble when hundreds of goblins appear. However, Fate seems like a completely new person as he slices through several of the goblins. After every single elimination, his gluttony skill is activated, and he just keeps going. The words "gluttony skill activated" are repeated hundreds of times as Fate finishes off all the goblins, and he is shocked to see that his stats have increased to a crazy amount. Greed points out that Fate must be full now, and Fate notices that his stomach hasn't growled even once that day, which has never happened before. Fate is completely confused though, since he was under the impression that people were born with the only skills they would ever have. Greed points out that this is true, but Fate's gluttony skill makes him different. Normally, stats increase from battles, and based on one's experience, their level goes up. However, the gluttony skill steals stats and other skills, at the cost of not benefiting from experience. Fate begins to understand and realizes that that must be why he is still level 1. Greed then surprises Fate as he explains that he knows this because they are the same. Just then, they notice the band of warriors approaching, and Greed tells Fate that his gluttony skill isn't the kind of thing he wants other people finding out about. It's one of the skills that defy divine law. Fate determines that he must do his fighting alone, but Greed reminds him that he has him now, and Fate will never be alone again. Fate is glad that Greed has accepted him as his master, but Greed tells him to calm down with all the master talk. Just before they leave, Greed reminds him to take the goblin ears so Fate can get paid. Afterward, Fate collects his reward and thinks about all the food he wants to get, but Greed reminds him that his maintenance comes first. Greed wants to be treated like the gem he is, but Fate thinks he is seeing himself too highly. The sword explains though that they don't call him Greed for nothing. Just then they run into a man, and a little girl that's with him asks for help. Fate uses Identify to see this man's threat level in case he just wants to ignore the whole thing, but finds that he has a skill that allows him to hide his stats from the Identify skill. This means there's no telling what this guy is capable of. Greed wonders what he will do, and Fate shows that he is a completely different person now, as he states that they can't just ignore the girl's cry for help. They follow him, and the scummy guy tells the girl that she will serve as a slave to the Holy Knights. Greed points out that the guy is pretty tough and tells Fate that this is his last chance to turn back. As he prepares to fight, Fate thinks about how he finally has some power now, and if someone's suffering in front of him, he wants to help them with it. Elsewhere, a woman of the church speaks to a bunch of sad, parentless children. Instead of trying to find them some parents, the nun tells them about the Holy Laplace, the creator of their world. When Laplace departed the world, she gifted the people special powers known as skills. The children, probably wishing she would have gifted them some parents, can only eat if they give their thanks, so they do. One kid is super edgy though. He doesn't stuff his face like the others, and explains that the Holy Laplace doesn't play fair. The Holy Knights and Warriors have amazing skills, but he has such a weak one, and his weak skill is probably why both his parents haven't come back from getting the milk. The woman of the cloth explains that in the old times, when Holy Laplace protected the world, there were no skills or stats, nor did monsters exist. Back then, everyone was equal. This sounds like heaven to the unwanted child, and he wishes that he had been born back then. Just then, another nun arrives and frantically explains that she can't find one of their missing orphans. She leaves to continue her search, and the other nun sighs as she wonders where the girl named Sahara has gone. Back near Fate, we see that Sahara is actually the girl he followed. The kidnapper lets out his frustrations on a steel beam and leaves, probably because that hurt a lot and he doesn't want to admit it. However, this gives our boy the opportunity he has been waiting for to rescue the girl. Unfortunately, the bad guy was standing right there, and compares Fate to all the other foolish heroes that challenge him out of some misguided notion of justice. The despicable villain points out that Fate has no chance of beating him, especially while protecting the girl. Fate wants to get her to safety, but he doesn't even know where that would be. Luckily, Greed has an idea and tells Fate to back away. The bandana-loving bad guy thinks Fate is weaker than him, so Greed thinks that they can take advantage of his overconfidence. The bad guy chases them and points out that if he kills Fate in front of the girl, then she will never disobey him again. Greed is somehow able to sense the man and tells Fate to knock over some boxes, and Fate faces the man head on. Greed becomes concerned when the man uses his sharp edge skill and instructs Fate to just strike him down through his sword. Fate does just that as he uses Greed to just slice right through everything it touches, and Fate demands an explanation from Bandana Man. The man refuses to tell Fate which Holy Knight had him kidnap the girl, so Fate resorts to good old-fashioned torture. The man can't take the excruciating pain any longer and reveals that it was Hato. A quick scene then shows how evil Hato is as he uses orphans to help him with his target practice. Fate managed to save the girl though and finds that her stomach is grumbling. They formally introduce themselves and go to get some food. Apparently the girl has never eaten before as she tries to bite food that is clearly scalding hot, and Fate reminds her to be careful. Sahara cries as it actually turns out that she has never eaten meat before, so Fate gives her his too. Later, Fate takes her back to the orphanage and is surprised when he is thanked for the first time in his entire life. Fate explains that he has a weak skill just like she does, and all it does is make him hungry. Even though Fate seemingly hated his own life just the day before, he thinks he has turned into some sort of life coach and gives Sahara some advice. He states that no matter how hard things get, if you can laugh them off, one day you'll find happiness. These words actually turn out to be that of his father. Back then he didn't understand, but his father telling him that helped him make it to this point. The self-help guru states that this is why he wants Sahara to survive too, and he leaves. A quick look at his stats shows that Fate is progressing rapidly, and Greed congratulates him on learning his first technical skill, the one-handed sword technique, Sharp Edge. This is a big deal since with technical skills, he gets tech arts, which are like secret techniques. This specific one allows Fate to attack twice in the space of one strike. That's the sharp edge Bandana Man was going to use, so Fate would have been in big trouble if he did. Greed calls Fate a hero, but our humble protagonist states that he isn't one, and if he had known about the sharp edge attack, he wouldn't have risked it. Greed points out that the truth is, battles come down to luck of the moment. There is no guarantee the stronger person will always win, so Fate realizes that luck must have been on his side. Fate thinks to himself that he wants to get stronger, strong enough that he can win without getting lucky. Just then, Greed reminds him that his first day of working for the Hearts will be the next day, and Fate screams in agony as he remembers that he didn't buy any clothes. At a bar, a man explains that someone named Sir Mason was struck down by a divine dragon. It is uncertain what will happen to the Hart family, but it's likely that Roxy will succeed him. Unfortunately, Mr. Mason was the one keeping the Holy Knights from going completely out of control, and the old man is not sure that even Lady Roxy can keep them in line. The drunk asks about Fate, and the bartender explains that he used to drop by after work every day. The next day, Fate is amazed as it's his first time in the Knights District. The Hart family estate is just as amazing, and Roxy arrives to greet him. Fate is taken aback by her appearance, and she compliments him on how well he cleans up. With that awkward interaction out of the way, Roxy brings him into another one by introducing Fate to her recently deceased father. She explains that he was taken out 5 days ago by a divine dragon in Gallia. Fate thinks about how Gallia is a continent that's dominated by monsters. One of the Holy Knight's major duties is keeping them contained. Roxy explains that the duty fell to the Hart family this year. A dangerous task, but not one that should have been deadly. However, a divine dragon that hadn't left its lair in over 1,000 years killed her father's entire force. Fate is in disbelief as he realizes that Roxy looked out for him these past few days even though she was dealing with the loss of her father. She doesn't want him to be sad though. She is the head of the house now and wants them to work together to make it a joyful place. They go to shake hands, but Fate knows that it will activate his telepathy, so he points at some random person. Haru is the chief maid, and she asks Fate to make sure he conducts himself in a manner befitting a servant of the Hart family. Fate agrees but seems to completely forget that as he shovels food into his mouth like he's preparing for a hibernation he didn't tell anyone about. A week later, Fate works so hard that the other servants tell him to get some rest. They reveal that he thought he was a bit strange since they always see him talking to his sword and he was shaking when he ate meat. Fate's stomach growls very loudly in front of them and they can't believe it since they all just ate. Fate is called to meet with Roxy, but his stomach continues to growl and not even Fate understands what's going on. Roxy tries to have a conversation with him, but Fate can only think about how he's strangely just getting hungrier and hungrier. He fears he won't be able to hold back any longer, but Roxy snaps him out of it. The two relate over their dead fathers since Fate's father died in a monster hunt as well. Roxy calls Fate family, but he wants to be something more. Before he can tell her though, she denies his request, and even more surprisingly, Fate begins to faint. Later, Fate wakes up in his room with a note from Roxy telling him to take the day off. Fate asks Greed what's going on with him since his hunger has never been this bad, and he can't hold himself together anymore. Greed reveals that once the Gluttony skill gets a taste of souls, there's no stopping it. The more Fate devours, the stronger he will get, and the more he devours, the more he will want. Fate is destined to seek out souls to consume until the day he dies. Fate wonders what will happen if he doesn't, and is horrified to hear that he will starve to death, or lose control and start attacking anyone in his path. Fate can't believe that as it makes him sound like some kind of monster. Greed gives him a tip though. He tells Fate that when his hunger approaches its limit, it will show in his eyes. Greed reiterates Fate's life has completely changed and there's no turning back now. Fate heads outside and walks past a group of people. Our hungry hero is shocked to realize that they smell delicious for some reason, and Greed explains that it's because his hunger boost has kicked in. It's what his red eyes indicate and is a temporary power that enables effective use of the Gluttony skill. During this time, Fate will have better night vision, be able to track prey by scent, and weaker prey will be terrified and paralyzed. This makes sense as they go outside the kingdom and find several goblins terrified. Our once innocent and frail hero is a completely different person now, as he helps himself to a massacre. With that group finished, they head to the Hobgoblin Forest. Fate continues the massacre but seems to become upset as he wonders how much more he needs before he is free from his hunger. Hours pass and Greed points out that it's over. Fate hopes to never feel like that again, so Greed tells him that he will have to hunt monsters every now and then and feed souls to Gluttony. Just then, Fate is shocked to see that a Goblin King has appeared. It doesn't have much of an edge on him stat-wise, but it does have a health regeneration skill. It heals wounds, and with it, Fate would be able to keep fighting even if he got injured. Our boy definitely wants some of that good Deadpool power and goes after the Goblin King. Fate gets disgusted though as the goblin devours a human, and Greed coldly points out that humans are a fine meal for monsters. Fate manages to get the drop on the giant troll, but freezes for a moment when he sees the human body. The fight continues, but Greed becomes frustrated that Fate is only dodging. Fate is concerned about getting attacked, but Greed tells him to trust him, and so he does. They manage to land the final blow, and Fate is glad to see that his stats have gone up even more. The skill Health Regeneration has also been added, but Fate is exhausted now. Greed then reveals that with Fate's current stats, he will be able to access Greed's first level, so he can achieve another form. All Fate has to do is hand over his stats as an offering to him. With his new form, Greed will be able to provide Fate with new functions. This sounds pretty awesome, so Fate would like to give it a try, but is shocked when Greed reveals that he will have to give him all the stats he has gained since they met. Fate is of course hesitant, but Greed points out that his name is Greed after all. Fate is still hesitant, so Greed reveals that if he doesn't unlock it, he will lose the right to wield him. Greed points out that Fate can get stronger on his own, or he can make him strong too, so they can work together. Fate determines that he doesn't have much of a choice, and Greed is the only partner for him. Greed tells him that he won't regret it and begins the process. It's a grand sight, and Fate can feel the power leaving him. With the process complete, Greed reveals that his new form is a magic bow. Some dumb goblin shows up at the absolute worst possible moment for him, and Greed instructs Fate to draw on the bow as the magical arrows will appear on their own. It's an amazing bow as Fate can aim wherever and his arrow will always land. Afterwards, Fate takes some goblin ears and leaves them on the doorsteps of the church, which I'm sure they will love to find first thing in the morning. Later, our heroic protagonist stops an intruder, but is shocked to find that it's actually Roxy dressed like a peasant. Fate wonders if she's really planning to go to the castle just like a normal old nobody, so she decides to tell him a secret since he has already seen her. She's going into town on a secret inspection. Roxy asks him not to tell anyone and imagines what Haru would say if she found out. Fate promises to not say a word, so she thanks him, but she also has the brilliant idea to have him accompany her as her escort. Fate is already a peasant, so he doesn't need a disguise, and they head into town. Fate keeps calling her milady, so Greed must remind him to stop, since people will notice. Roxy reminds him as well, prompting Greed to make a snide remark. Fate tells Greed to shut up, but Roxy thinks he was talking to her, so Fate just changes the subject. Roxy tells him to call her Lexi, and Greed can't help but make another remark, this time about how she couldn't think of a more creative name. Fate tells Greed to shut up again, causing the clueless Roxy to apologize to Fate for being so annoying. Fate urgently explains that it was just a misunderstanding, and Roxy, trying to act like she didn't just reject our boy very recently, says that she was excited to be going into town with him. The sarcastic sword makes yet another remark, causing Fate to threaten him, but Roxy stops him as she doesn't want anyone being so rough with their weapon. She realizes that she has never had a good look at his sword, and Fate hesitates to show her. This is really bad since someone with a worthless skill like his wouldn't normally have a sword, and she might think it's weird. Not to mention how monstrous his Gluttony skill is. He remembers Greed's words explaining how once it gets a taste of souls there's no stopping it, and how if he doesn't feed it he will lose control and start attacking anyone in his path. Fate determines that he can't let her learn about his Gluttony skill, but Butterfingers drops his sword and Roxy takes a closer look. She doesn't seem to learn anything from it, but tells Fate that it does need some maintenance. Roxy then flexes super hard as she offers to take him to the Hart family's personal blacksmith later. Fate tells Greed to be happy since he will be getting all fixed up, but Greed is completely silent. Fate wonders what is wrong but is shocked when his own sword tells him to shut up as he is basking in the moment. Greed says he is still in heaven after smelling Roxy's scent, so Fate decides that he might just have to throw Greed around after all. They finally make it to the very busy town. Roxy finds some grapes and the merchant explains that they were picked from the Hart family's vineyard. Even though it's her vineyard that she can just eat from directly, she decides to try one. Fate is amazed by the taste, prompting the cocky Roxy to brag about how those grapes are grown at home. The merchant hears this, and just seconds into their mission, it seems like she has already blown their cover. However, Greed gives Fate an idea, and our hero saves the day by explaining that Lexi has a relative that works there. Roxy is impressed by his quick thinking, but Greed tells Fate that he owes him one. Just then, the crowd gets all flustered as some holy knights are approaching. The crowd is surprised to see a holy knight in the market, and think about how these types of things have started to happen only after Sir Mason died. At the worst possible moment, Fate's stomach begins to growl, causing the Holy Knight to become furious. Fate doesn't want to cause a commotion, so he decides to just apologize. His apology isn't enough for the Holy Knight though. This Holy Knight has some serious issues as he wants to embarrass Fate for some reason. He tries to step on Fate, but Roxy stops him. The Holy Knight turns his attention to the peasant girl, but begins to recognize her. The crowd thinks the same as they wonder if she is Lady Roxy. Greed comes up with a brilliant idea to have Fate pretend they are a couple. He explains that if Fate gets really clingy, no one will think it's Lady Roxy. Our boy is shocked to hear such a bold idea, but Roxy hears him repeat it, and thinks it's genius. She grabs our hero and they pretend to bicker about him not eating the breakfast she made him. The incredibly awkward interaction seems to get the job done, as everyone is cringing too hard to say anything, allowing the two to get away. Just then, Fate realizes that he can hear Roxy's thoughts, and she thinks about how she has never locked arms with a boy before. She thinks about how fast her heart is racing, causing our boy to panic. Roxy decides that they need to keep moving, and Fate begins to think that escorting Lady Roxy might be a bit too tough for him. Moments later, Roxy feeds into a stereotype as she explains that she is a girl, so of course she would be interested in an absurdly gigantic gem. There are also some ores there which may or may not have gems in them. Fate uses Identify to cheat and see if there's a gem in one, but Greed tells him to be careful since merchants hate people that can use Identify. Apparently, Roxy couldn't care less about those stupid ores as she's just looking at more gems. Fate is amazed since at this moment, Roxy just seems like a normal girl, not a Holy Knight. The merchant offers them a discount so Fate can buy something for his girl, but he just gets embarrassed and Roxy decides that she has no use for gems anyway. Roxy moves on quickly to ask if Fate knows any active warriors, since she has some questions for them. Luckily for them, they overhear some guys talking about all the dead goblins that were recently found. Rumor is that it's a wandering monster that did it. The problem with that though is that it doesn't explain how the orphanage in the slums had Goblin King ears donated to it. Unfortunately for Roxy, they don't have any more information, so she asks Fate to take her where warriors gather. Fate realizes that this is actually what her inspection is about, and she reveals that she's investigating the wandering monster said to have appeared around the capital lately. Fate is at a loss for words since he is actually this wandering monster, and Greed makes another smart aleck remark about how interesting of a twist this is. Fate heads to the bar he used to go to, where the bartender doesn't even recognize him at first. The bartender is surprised to see that Fate is still alive, but even more stunned to see that he has a girlfriend now. Fate worries that Roxy might be getting offended by people calling her his girlfriend, and Greed points out that she might even have Fate executed for it. I guess Roxy was flustered too as she absolutely destroys a cup, but the bartender says it's okay since it happens all the time. Greed tells Fate that she was probably feeling self-conscious around him, and this causes Fate to obliterate his cup too. Greed says that it's good since it's a sign that he's getting stronger, and the bartender says that that cup was on its last legs anyway. The carefree bartender then spills the beans as he has heard about a warrior who made a killing off of goblin corpses. This warrior went out hunting and found a mountain of goblin corpses with their ears still intact. Roxy points out that if a warrior did all that work, they wouldn't just leave a bunch of valuable corpses around, and determines that it must have been a monster that has migrated from another region. That'll be bad for business though, since a lot of business travel is done through those goblin plains. If there's some mysterious creature on the prowl, people won't want to travel there. Fate gets depressed knowing that he is to blame, but gets distracted when his old friend arrives to be startled by Fate's ghost. The old man reveals a popular theory that the roaming monster is a lich. This is very troublesome, which is why the Holy Knights will be taking direct action to deal with it. Greed is worried to hear that the Holy Knights are getting involved since he just drained all of Fate's stats, and Fate would get destroyed by them. The old man wants to know why the girl is so curious, but she isn't clever enough to think of a good answer. Fate can't help either since he is too busy thinking about how horrible things would be if Roxy joins the hunt and sees him doing his gluttony thing. Just then, some traveling warriors arrive demanding drinks and demanding that Roxy join them for some fun. Our boy springs into action, but Roxy shows she can handle her business easily. The warriors determine that only a Holy Knight could have that much power, and Roxy finally doesn't deny it. The bartender knew all along, but the stupid warriors are amazed to realize that it's Roxy of the Heart family, one of the 5 families supporting the king. They apologize profusely, even going as far as to give her all their money. Roxy of course rejects it, and expresses shame to see that the people the Holy Knights have sworn to protect view them as objects of fear. Her father dreamed of a world where Holy Knights and lowly peasants could laugh together. This is a dream she shares with him. They all begin to get along, and Fate thinks that until her dreams come true, he will follow her. Sometime later, Greed enjoys being fixed up a little too much, but we see that it worked out really well as he feels like a whole new sword. Afterwards, Roxy explains that she didn't know about the hunt because it's being led by the Berserk family and they simply didn't inform her. Just then, the two hear that Hato is hurting someone. The Berserks explain that they are simply taking a lost child into their protection. Fate releases the boy as it doesn't look like protection to them, and Roxy tells the Berserks that they will take care of the boy. However, she asks Raphael why she wasn't informed about the hunt for the wandering monster. He explains that he assumed she would be too busy mourning her departed father, but she points out that she is just fine. The Berserks decide to just leave, but Hato the jerk tells Fate that he should stick to acting like the trash he is. Fate doesn't back down though, so Raphael must tell Hato to drop it. The two take the boy to find his mother, and Fate remembers when he once got lost as a kid. It was after his father died and he moved to the capital. He looks back and wonders what happened to the holy knight who looked after him back then. Just when it seems like they won't be able to find the boy's mother, she appears out of nowhere. Fate is glad but is amazed to see just how happy Roxy is to have helped the boy. The simp stares for a bit too long though and suggests that they head back home. Roxy reminds him that if they get in trouble, they will do it together, and he agrees. When they return, Fate hopes that days like this one could last forever, but he knows that just isn't possible. He asks Greed for a way to hunt monsters without Roxy finding out, and Greed can only think of one thing. He suggests a perception warping magic item. He then leads Fate to a shop to buy a mask that will make them look different to whoever sees them. Later, Fate gives Roxy one of the ores she was clearly not interested in. He thanks her for giving him a job that has allowed him to find friends that he now considers family. Fate apologizes for not being able to get her the gem she was looking at, but Roxy explains that she's actually really happy with what he got her. This powerful beast of a woman just casually cracks the thing open with their bare hands, and Fate points out how useful his identify skill is as there's some pretty shiny stuff inside. Roxy promises to cherish it forever and wonders what she will give Fate back in return. Her ideas are a year's supply of meat or a whetstone for sharpening his sword, but Fate says none of that is necessary. However, Greed tells him to shut up and accept that whetstone since he needs to be taken care of. It seems like another happy ending, however we see that the menacing looking Raphael has gathered other knights to discuss their excursion to Gallia. Thanks for watching the first few parts of this recap. Subscribe and ring the notification bell for future parts.